Welcome to the SmartFlow podcast presented by Jotform, where we feature top leaders sharing their smart solutions in business and life.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here. I'm one of the hosts of the SmartFlow podcast, where we feature top leaders in healthcare. Today is no different. I have Michael Chang of Artera.ai. And Michael, before I formally introduce you, just a few words from the SmartFlow podcast sponsor. It's presented by Jotform Enterprise. Jotform Enterprise is a HIPAA-friendly, no-code platform that empowers healthcare organizations through custom forms and e-signatures. We're going to geek out today on AI and a lot of things in healthcare with Michael. The Jotform solutions enhance patient and provider experience by streamlining intakes and automating administrative tasks. And it's obviously in a secure environment. There's a great example by that Body Brave. They actually consolidated 5 separate platforms and replaced them with Jotform, and they saved a lot of money, but obviously 120 hours of staff time in the first 6 months with just data collection and reporting tools. And obviously there's a lot of great use cases around healthcare organizations that want to digitize forms, replace paper-based processes, collect e-signatures, and much more. And it's very easy to implement. I've even used it. And even if you're not, technically minded, you're totally fine. So learn more at jotform.com/enterprise. I am super excited to introduce Michael Chang. He's been in the health tech space for over 10 years. He's built the marketing infrastructure and led go-to-market commercialization efforts for companies in cardiology, surgery, radiology, and for Artera AI in oncology. And Artera uses, and you'll correct me, Michael, this is what I gleaned from it, but Artera uses an advanced AI test that looks at different types of medical data to give personalized results. And what that means is it helps doctors and patients make treatment decisions that are really tailored to each individual. Their motto is, cancer is personal and cancer therapy should be too. So, Michael, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be having this conversation with you.
So you'll tell me how I got that, but talk and tell people about Artera and what you do. And while you're doing that, I'm going to pull up the website.
Yeah, sounds great. So Artera, like you said, it's a precision medicine company. It got started sort of by pulling in the healthcare side and the tech side of things. It was started by our current CEO and co-founder, Andre Esteva. He was a AI researcher out of Salesforce, doing medical research and medical AI. And he joined forces with Dr. Felix Fang, our other co-founder, who sadly passed away earlier this year. But he was
Sorry to hear that. I saw that on the website.
Yeah, he's far too young. But he was a radiation oncologist, big time researcher in the prostate cancer world. And they kind of teamed up to say, hey, what can we be doing to, sort of further the use of artificial intelligence, use of AI in cancer therapies, and specifically really kind of tackling the hardest questions in cancer, which is, there's a tremendous amount of therapies now that are available for all kinds of cancer, and the cancer mortality rates and everything continues to drop and continues to get lower thanks to the efforts of so many biotech and pharmaceutical companies of developing these amazing treatments. The challenge now actually becomes, like, out of all of these treatments, what do you choose for your patients? What's the right one for this patient? And that's a much harder problem to solve. And that's really the challenge that Artera is trying to solve for. We got started and we are currently commercial in prostate cancer, but the hope and dream is obviously to leverage the AI platform that's been developed here at Artera to go into other cancer states, not just prostate, into breast or lung or head and neck or whatever the case may be, and really bring the idea of precision medicine, of personalized therapies, of letting physicians and patients have that empowered shared decision making of knowing what is the right therapy that's going to be the best for them, that's going to have the lowest side effects, have the best potential outcomes, and making that right decision. So that's we're on our way to do so, and we're obviously very pleased with some of the early results that we've been able to accomplish to date.
Talk about a little bit how it works, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many things here which makes the health tech space so interesting because you have patients, you have doctors and hospital systems, and then you have insurance companies as well. So there's so many players here. But
Yeah.
I don't know, from like a patient perspective, how does it work? If they're like, oh, I want, I'll let you go into it, but I think it
Yeah.
overlays on top of the current data. And so, like, if I'm a patient, I would want to go to a hospital or clinician that is using it because it enhances my treatment and everything like that. But I'll let you explain exactly how it works.
For sure. So I'll take a step back and just kind of let people know sort of what when you hear the phrase personalized medicine, and I'm guilty of this in marketing, right? Is you just start using phrases that no one actually knows what the heck it means, right? What does personalized medicine? What does precision medicine mean? It really got started with sort of the genomics revolution, right? Where basically we started to really understand the biology of cancer a whole lot better. And cancer really is not it's not a singular disease. There's multiple genetic mutations, molecular pathways that get activated or deactivated that leads to a particular cancer. And so what's happening when we say precision medicine is really that folks now, doctors are getting better of understanding what is really the underlying makeup of this particular cancer that's affecting this patient. They may have, you know, six, seven different types of mutations, different things going on in those cancer cells that's causing their particular case of prostate cancer, which is different from another patient's prostate cancer that may only have three mutations of, different mutations or what have you. And so that's the first understanding of like everyone's prostate cancer is actually a little bit different mutations, different aggressiveness, different sort of risk of mortality, risk of metastasis, et cetera. And then likewise, on the therapy front, there's been a sort of a huge development on the genomic side. You hear about, antibodies and all these things, sort of really targeted therapies that go after specific genetic mutations or molecular pathways that are
Yeah, so you're really
controlling.
only killing the things that you
Exactly.
want to kill, not healthy cells and they have all these side effects.
Right. So this has been a boon. That the challenge though has been from an accessibility standpoint, in which that to do and you hear this with a lot of folks is that you need to do these really exhaustive panels of doing DNA sequencing to figure out what's going on, to doing these RNA PCR assays or whatever to get a sense of what is happening at the biological basis for a particular patient. And it works, but it's fairly expensive, right? There's a lot of new tests and new things that you need to do in order to really assess that personal risk. One of the insights that Artera had that was that the way that clinicians, pathologists diagnose cancer is they look at the biopsy slides, right? This is very standard. Is you take a biopsy of the tumor itself, and historically, this is how doctors, pathologists graded cancer, was looking at those slides and saying, how aggressive does this cancer look just by looking under a microscope and looking at those images. And there's a lot of information in those images, a lot of patterns and shapes and different
Yeah, you can
reactions.
see this right here on the screen here.
Have you
Like,
exactly? Yeah, that. There you go.
like
There's your standard digital pathology image, and I can't read it. I'm not a pathologist, but they can look at that pathology. Pathologists can look at that and say, okay, I see these cellular changes and morphology changes and what have you. And one of the things that AI is really good at is pattern recognition, right? Far, far better at pattern recognition than humans can be, right? In sort of the limits of our of our retinas and our abilities to make sense of these and these are big, big images, right? These are tens of thousands of pixels by tens of thousands of pixels. When you really zoom in, you can get a lot of detail and resolution to there. So there's a ton of information in there that a pathologist is probably providing a high level summary of saying, yep, it's this type of cancer. They do grading, right? There's something called cancer grades where they are looking at those biopsy slides and are able to bucket into, are you grade 1 to grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, grade 5, right? So there is some sort of personalization taking place there. But the idea is like, can we just take that biopsy slide and really go further? And so that really was the impetus of Artera. Was sort of it started almost as a research project or of a, can we do this, of looking at the biopsy slides and trying to predict what is the future patient outcomes of these patients just by looking at the slides. We also combine it with some clinical variables like age and PSA levels and other sort of fairly easy to measure things. But the idea was to, if we could do this without leveraging the genomic data that is now very sort of common and mainstream, because those things are relatively expensive to get those genetic signatures and genomic markers and what have you. And the seminal paper that published by Andrea Steva in Nature Digital Medicine was that it does work just by looking at the digital pathology images of those biopsy slides combined with clinical variables, that the model, the AI model that was built, was able to better predict uh, distant metastasis rates, prostate cancer specific mortality, overall survival, biochemical failure, a bunch of endpoints, cancer related endpoints, better than just relying on clinical variables alone. And so that sort of set the stage that, hey, this is actually doable. And since then, there's been further refinements to the model, to additional validations of, hey, can this work for, patients who are treated with prostatectomy? Can this work with all these, to confirm that, hey, this wasn't just a one-off result that, you got lucky and proved something, but that really that we're showing that this works in a variety of different types of patient cohorts. We're starting to see publishing some data now in breast cancer as well too, that the same process, looking at the biopsy slides combined with some clinical variables, that we can make accurate predictions about what's going to happen to this patient. And more importantly, what therapies are going to be beneficial. Is something like hormone therapy going to help this patient reduce the risk of distant metastasis, reduce the risk of mortality, or is it not really going to do a whole lot? That level of prediction, that therapy guidance, is really what's generating a lot of excitement now in terms of in the medical community, because that really is going to give a much better tool for clinicians to say, hey, not only do I know you have cancer, and I know it's an aggressive form of cancer, but now I actually know also what therapies should I actually give you and prescribe to you that's going to be the best bet in treating this cancer.
So, Michael, it's a great product. It's an amazing team, as you mentioned with the co-founder. I looked at, the site. You have the chief medical officer, Tim Showalter. You have, just a slew of amazing advisors. Your board directors include the CEO of Intel and the co-founder of Salesforce, Mark Benioff.
Yeah.
Now you have to get it out in the world, and that's your job. So I'd love to hear, okay, the more people who get in the hands could save more lives, right? So where do you start with getting this out to, I mean, there's so many channels and avenues. What do you do to get it out to the world?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And that's my job historically been in marketing, that sort of, trying to sell a new procedure, new product, new test, new whatever to clinicians, to hospital systems, to whatever is to payers, it's
Yeah, where do you
hard.
start?
It's well, number one, I think always, right, is, are you solving a clinical problem? Are you solving a clinical need? And I think when you solve a clinical need, everything else becomes a whole lot easier. If you're not really solving a clinical need, your job becomes infinitely harder as a marketer. And if you're in sales and marketing, you know that, right? It's just like, if the product isn't going to sell itself, then it's going to be it's a real uphill climb. So I think that's the first thing, and I think this first number one is addressing the fact that, yeah, we are actually providing a novel tool in being able to derive treatment decision insights that no other test can do. So that in and of itself is a huge differentiator. But then you got to do all the other hard work, right? Which is, you got to go out there and talk to doctors. You got to convince them that hey, that the data is good. You got to share with them the data. You got to make the data digestible. Even though, of course, there's some folks that actually want to sit down and read a New England Journal of Medicine. Most doctors don't actually have the time or the patience to actually do so. So you got to make it digestible. You got to get those key takeaways out. You got to get the testimonials from the principal investigators to really sort of, what is the key takeaway that folks need to understand. You need to, do all these different things. You need to build a sales team and get out there. Doctors are busy, as they should be. They're treating patients, right? So they don't have a whole lot of time to be sitting and watching, YouTube videos like this or what have you, or podcasts. Maybe they have a little bit when they're driving back and forth between clinic or what have you. But you gotta catch them in those tiny little moments to sort of provide the education and really give them the comfort level. Um, the other thing that's important, especially in healthcare, is it doesn't matter if you have the best test in the world. It doesn't matter if you have the best data in the world, is you also got to get reimbursement. So you got to get the payers on board. Thankfully, we were able to do that. We got a Medicare payment rate a year ago. And that really was what kickstarted the commercial efforts, right? Without that
Do
sort
you have
of
to start there sometimes?
I think so. I mean, it really depends. Depends on the structure of the I would say of the reimbursement landscape. There's some things that, and this is a
That
coming from the
seems like
medical
a tough
device
feat
world.
actually to do.
Yeah, it's a very weird dynamic that in that you almost in some ways it's actually a whole lot easier to and this actually kind of impacts the pace of innovation. It's a lot easier to sell something where there's already an existing code and an existing reimbursement. So that, but then that creates a lot of Me Too products. So how do you find those new areas that maybe you can apply a new technology to that gives you some access to reimbursement, but also allows you to open the pathway for your own reimbursement, sort of to distinguish yourself from, sort of all the other companies out there or all the other products out there. So that's a very difficult sort of needle to thread, but that is something that I think people in the medtech space have to really understand of how to thread that needle of like you want to create something that's new. And but you also don't want to make it so different that like there's no code, there's no infrastructure in place to support its billing and reimbursement.
I mean, there's just a huge deterrent for anyone. Like, okay, I get the payers on board, and I get the doctors on board, and then I
Yeah.
got to get the patients on board
Yeah.
too. So it's like, who makes the decision in these medical organizations to actually implement Artera?
Yeah. In our particular case, it actually is actually the patient. So we actually are, I mean, so we actually do provide, and once again, this is something that you see a lot with a lot of companies is we will submit the bill to the patient's insurance company. And if, the patients are covered by Medicare, then it will be completely paid for, no out-of-pocket cost whatsoever for Medicare patients and most actually Medicare Advantage patients as well. But and that actually works pretty well for in the prostate cancer space. A lot of patients are obviously Medicare qualified. But we do have commercial payers, and we're working with them one by one to try to get coverage. Because of that factor, we also have, we had to build a financial assistance program to allow patients who may not be covered, who may be considered out of network, to be able to make the test affordable and relevant to them. That is the one benefit. That is also one of the key appeals of our test relative to the genomic and genetic tests, which can oftentimes cost thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars, is that we do have a huge cost savings because of the fact that we are not needing to run expensive wet lab, assays, materials, et cetera. It's just literally a soft
Digital.
digital assessment of the biopsy slide, which has already been done and taken, paid for, that there's a lot of cost savings on that end to both the patients and to the healthcare system as a whole.
Walk me through like a typical scenario. Like a patient goes in, we'll say in this prostate example, goes in the doctor, they're diagnosed with some type of prostate cancer. Does
Yeah.
then the patient say, "Hey, I want you to send the slides to Arturo," or is the doctor, maybe you've contacted that doctor and they're like, "Hey, here's an option of what we can do," or maybe both? What's that pathway look like?
It's both. It's both these days. I would say the much more common scenario right now is the fact that yeah, we've talked to the doctors, we've educated the doctors, they're on board. We've explained to them, hey, for this type of patient, this will be a really helpful guide to sort of your treatment decision. So there's a video on our patient page on our website. You can watch sort of what that conversation looks like, where the doctor says, "Hey, listen, I want to run this test. This will help me decide what to do X, Y, and Z," and explain sort of the benefits of the test. And the patients will say, "Yep, that sounds good. Sign me up. How long will it take?" The question that they usually ask, well, how much is it going to cost? How long, do I have to do another procedure? No, no, no new procedure. This is what the cost is. And usually the patients are on board, and then um, the doctor then orders the test, and then we get the results delivered in actually in a few days, which is once again another huge advantage. Because, if you just got a cancer diagnosis, the last thing you want to do is sit around for weeks and months trying to figure out what to do. So having that clarity and knowing that you're going to get a test result that's going to let the doctor know exactly how to treat you is very, very rewarding. But in today's day and age, patients are super educated and are becoming more educated, and so there's plenty of stories that we hear of doctors coming to us like, "Hey, my patient just told me about this test. I told them about they got prostate cancer, and they're like, "Hey, doctor, can you please run this test because I want to know what I should do." And the doctor is being educated by the patients. So it definitely happens both ways, but I would say in general, it's more likely that the doctors are the the gatekeepers, if you will, right? But certainly, you know, in the healthcare space, it's important to make sure that this education hits everyone.
Yeah, so I mean, it could be the patient bringing it to it, but a lot of the doctors are like, listen, this is something that's going to give us more data, and so let's do it. What's been effective in getting in front of doctors or hospital systems? Because, like you said, they are busy, they're treating patients, and then when they're not treating patients, they're probably doing paperwork
Yeah.
and running their staff and everything like that. What's been effective in actually educating in front of doctors at a mass scale?
Yeah, I think a big factor is obviously the clinical impact is important. Like I said, it always goes back to that. If you're not solving a clinical issue, solving a clinical need, it really is it's you're going to have a hard time. But I do think that a big factor for us that we've been successful is that we can highlight a lot of successful case studies. So when we go to a doctor and say, "Hey, listen, you know, this other practice down the street, was able to implement this and they've seen a lot of success with it. And we can share with you what those results are, that they have patients that are happy because they get, faster sort of treatment decisions, in a few days versus weeks. They're happy because the cost is very little, and that is super easy to order. That actually would say was probably the biggest is the ordering workflow is actually for a lot of new technologies that you really need to consider, which is how easy are you making it to do, right? If it's something that, hey, let's, that is
That's
easy,
what
and when
doctors may ask because
that
that's
ultimately,
in my mind, Michael. I think of
yeah,
what pushback could you possibly get? Okay, so it doesn't really cost the patient anything. You're sending slides or whatever digitally,
yeah.
and it can create a better outcome. I guess one pushback would be, what's the workflow look like? Because I'm already busy. Are there any other like objections you get from doctors or hospitals?
Yeah, workflow is a big one. Even if you make it easy, it's still not a slam dunk because it's still requiring them to do something different, right? So like, listen, I'm really used to doing this. I already have all my tests ordered or whatever before the patient even comes. My nurse will deal with it all, so I don't even need to order the test. Now you're asking me to order the test, so that's more work for me. So it's even so you try to make it as easy as possible, but definitely we've learned, I would say over the course of Artera, that we've simplified a lot of things as well too. Early on, we try to say, hey, can you, provide all of these bits and pieces of information? And over time, we're like, we don't really need that piece of information, or we only need that piece of information one out of 100 times. So why do we make it mandatory? Why don't we say we don't need it? And if we do need it, we'll always come back and, reach out to you in that one out of 100 times versus, making everyone provide it every single time. So those are definitely some updates that we've made. And that is one of the challenges I think that definitely occurs of taking something that works really well in a research lab, in a research environment, and translating into the real world. That commercialization is not trivial. Yes, adoption from my end, from the marketing side, generating awareness, generating sort of education and interest and all that kind of stuff. Not easy, but there's some pretty clear ways to do so. There's, a lot of tried and true ways of, sort of multi-channel marketing and doing, peer-to-peer education and, leveraging key opinion leaders and all these types of things, right? A lot of these things that we can certainly get into on the marketing side. But fundamentally, I think a big factor is really also recognizing the operational scale ups that you need to have a process that can be adaptable to real world conditions and all the variances that you have. Like sometimes, you know, we ask for a slide, we don't get the slide that we necessarily want, so we need to do a cut of the biopsy block ourselves. Like those are things that you face in the real world, because maybe the biopsy sample was lost. The biopsy slide was lost, and all we have is the original, tissue block. Okay, fine, we'll work off of that. So these are the types of things that you start running into as you scale up and take something that like, hey, works great in this pristine lab environment doesn't work so great once you try to move it into the real world and deal with those real world issues.
Yeah, I mean, what sticks out for me is, which is applicable to any business of any kind, is just simplifying the workflow process and making it easy for people to onboard and actually get what they need. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more. I know there was an article about what you were just talking about digital pathology.
Yeah, I think that's one of the cool things is there's oftentimes you see in these in newspapers or in social media, it's like, oh, some new AI model was able to do this and do that, and don't get me wrong, it's super exciting, fantastic news, and there has been a lot of these developments with leveraging AI for doing computer vision on these digital pathology slides. And so we're not new or unique in the sense that like, we're the only ones doing this. There's been a lot of other AI companies that have done this. I think some of the difference is that we did really sort of put to the test our AI model sort of resiliency and robustness in dealing with sort of real world variances, right? Slides don't always stain, they degrade over time, the staining. How they get scanned into the machine it can be different, right? From operator to operator. And so the quality of the slides may be slightly different. So how good is a model if terms of dealing with some of those variances that you're going to deal with, right? It's kind of like with the iPhone, right? Like back in the day, it's like, hey, it's great, but if you drop it and breaks super easily, then that's not so great, right? Because the reality is we drop our phones all day long. So, hey, we got to make a glass that's a little bit tougher and more resilient, right? While still having all of the touch and, resolution, all that kind of stuff. That's all important. And people don't necessarily pay attention to the robustness and the resiliency of something until you actually start using it. And you're like, oh crap, I'm using this day to day, and this really, really does matter. It can't be something that's so finicky. It needs to have all of the conditions perfect in order for this thing to work. And that is, I think, one of the challenges with a lot of the AI models. I think you see it as well too. Is in the world of like the large language models, once you throw it out in the wild, you're like the engineer's like, oh, I've never seen it face these types of conditions before. And that's why it's giving these weird responses because it hasn't really been fully tested to the extent that it needs to be for it to be, truly used in the real world.
I'd love to hear some of your, we're talking about AI and med tech in general, some of your favorite med tech companies. And it could be on the professional side, from doctors, or it could be just on the consumer side, right? I mean, we have things like, the Aura Ring, or like, I don't know if there's anything you
Yeah.
use personally on the AI side, but some of your favorite, it could be professional, like just health tech, because you've been in the space for a long time, or consumer.
Yeah, I think I think there's a lot of cool things happening, but I think one of the things that I always look at is how good is a a company at in terms of building a true community. I think this wasn't actually a company that I actually was a part of, it was a cardiovascular company that I really was impressed with back in the day, where they pioneered a new procedure where instead of sort of, I'm sure you're familiar with stents and all that kind of stuff, but instead of doing stents, they were trying to remove the plaque and calling it, atherectomy, which is a different procedure. But they really built a strong community of these guys the doctors who really kind of bought into this idea and really created that community feeling of supporting each other as well too, of educating each other because it's a new technique, it's a new thing that at the end of the day, I think, we oftentimes lose sight of the fact, when we're pitching technology and pitching products and whatever, and you're talking about all the technical aspects and what have you. At the end of the day, people really want to be are much more motivated by those relationships, more so than anything else. And if they feel like, hey, if I'm adopting a new technology, but I have a support network of other doctors who are experiencing the same thing and are going to help me through the learning curves and through the issues I'm going to be facing. Same with patients, right? I think we see that as well really strongly on the patient support groups. I think especially in the oncology world, that's a big factor that there's a lot of these things that can be done. And once again, there are a lot of companies doing this. I'm not saying it's anything unique, but the companies that do a really good job of creating that network effect between clinicians and patients and everyone's like that to really share in that experience versus just hawking this product and sort of staying in the more technical realm, but really understanding sort of what the supporting infrastructure is needed to make sure that people have success collectively, doctors, physicians, payers, everybody, hospital admin, staff, everybody sort of is committed into doing something. I think that really is powerful. It kind of goes back to that poster right there. I rise up together. I see that now, and I just realized that it's like a perfect apropos of what it is about creating that community of making sure that everyone is rising up together.
Yeah, and you mentioned community. Talk about partnerships, right? Partnerships
Oh.
are just an amazing way to help everyone rise up. So talk about who's a good partner for you and some of your partnerships you've forged.
Yeah, I think we've been very lucky in that regard that we formed some really strong partnerships. The biggest one that we're working on, which is a company that I know you're familiar with, is Tempus. They've been obviously a leader in the precision medicine space. So, sort of being able to tap into that network of folks who are really obviously have been passionate and have been working in this area for, years and years and years, and the infrastructure that they've built up is fantastic. Part of the success that we have in our partnership with Tempest is, we are bringing sort of complementary strengths, right? And I think that's a big thing for any kind of partnerships is what are the complementary strengths that you're bringing to the table, right? If there's not a lot of complements and there's a lot of competitiveness instead, right? You're only sort of collaborating on this one tiny segment, but the rest of the stuff is not really complementary to each other, you're going to have a lot of problems. But in the case of Tempest, you know, they are, they're very focused and they've, sort of their claim to fame is all of the amazing assays that they can run on the genome. When I talked about the genomic, sort of molecular, research and development and insights that are on that side, they have a lot of these commercialized products that can, derive a lot of insights on DNA sequencing and RNA and all these types of things. And so, that's their strength. Our strength is on the digital pathology side of leveraging the biopsy slide. So it's different. We're not competitive in that realm, but we're trying to answer similar questions, right? That we're calling on the same folks, the medical oncologists, the urologists, et cetera, that are trying to do this. So there's a lot of synergies in terms of the message that we're trying to get out there and trying to explain to people of how we can leverage AI used in completely different ways, right? We're using it for digital pathology. We're using computer vision. They're doing it on the genetic biomarkers, et cetera. But fundamentally, despite our different approaches to stuff, we're trying to address the same questions and helping the same people. And so those partnerships are going to really be powerful.
Are there any other partnerships you have or that you're like, yeah, they'd be a perfect
Yeah,
partner, but I mean, you're busy doing a million things and
for
maybe
sure.
they should you should contact each other.
Yeah, so digital pathology labs is a big partnership for us, right? Because a lot of once again, we're working on developing these tests that leverages those digital pathology sites, but we're not the ones doing the staining, and we don't really want to be the ones doing the staining. We don't really want to be the ones doing the initial diagnosis. Those are where I think those pathology labs. So we have partnerships with a bunch of digital pathology labs across the country with PathNet and CorePlus and a variety of different folks. And we're making more and more partnerships. We're also making those partnerships abroad. So we signed a deal with Diagnexia, which is a digital pathology lab out in the UK. We're working with a company called Oncotest, which is based in Israel. So there's a lot of these partnerships, and that's what's going to really allow us, our going back to our mission is really to bring precision medicine to the masses. And so, we're not going to be able to do it alone, right? As a small US company, we want to get this into the hands of our partners overseas as well too, to let them, help and get out there. There's a lot of oncologists to call. We can't call on all of them. So I have no problems with, having, folks in other geographies and who are very knowledgeable and already have strong relationships with folks to leverage them and help us get the news out there and get this test into the hands of those doctors.
Michael, I have one last question, just about what's next for Artera, but I just want to thank you, and I want to point people to check out Artera.ai to learn more. They're doing some amazing things, and in cancer therapy and prostate specifically, and it's like I was actually thinking about this the other day. I was thinking, I don't know why I think about the prostate. I was like, is it like inevitable? Like every male is going to have an enlarged prostate or prostate cancer? This went through my head literally yesterday, and as I was preparing for this, I'm like, it's kind of crazy. Like it kind of is. I don't.
And that's a common saying in the world of prostate cancer is that most almost, I don't know if it's most men or all men will develop prostate cancer, but only a very few will actually die from prostate cancer. Like the idea is that prostate cancer is one of those weird cancers that the spread of it is very, very wide. There's some that are really slow growing. Within prostate, there's even a thing called active surveillance, which you may be familiar with. They're like, we're not even going to treat this prostate. We're just going to watch it. We're just going to watch it very, very carefully, but we're not even going to treat it because it may be so slow growing that there's no need to actually really go out and treat it. And some people don't like that idea, right? Obviously, a lot of patients don't love the idea, like, oh, there's a cancer growing inside me or what have you. But it's like, if it's not doing you any harm, then, is it really worth taking it out? So in any case, but yeah, so I think prostate cancer is a fascinating field that, I think we're very lucky to kind of get started, but there's a lot of other areas that I think we're excited to get into. Breast cancer, I think, is something that we're very excited about. That's sort of our next big cancer. If you think about it, prostate is obviously for men, breast cancer is for women. I mean, you kind of solve those, you kind of really solved a lot of issues for both men and women. But breast cancer is a very it's another field that I think is, if we can address some of the challenges there are a lot of targeted therapies in breast cancer. There's actually fewer targeted therapies in prostate cancer. So I think our ability to better provide targeted therapies, suggestions and sort of guidance on that will make a big impact on the breast cancer side.
Yeah. Michael, first of all, thank you. I was really excited about this interview because, in my world, in my thought personally, is like, if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. It doesn't matter anything else that's going on. So this is just such an important topic. And so thank you. I encourage people to check out Artera.ai. They have a resources page with lots of stuff on that, whether you're a patient or a doctor. They have videos. So check it out. And Michael, thank you. We'll see everyone next time.
Yeah, really, really appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the SmartFlow podcast. We'll see you again next time. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and go to jotform.com/enterprise to learn more.